Welcome to Create More Intimacy, a podcast for men. I'm Elisa Stoddard, and I help successful men stop chasing sex and start building real connection so they finally feel close, connected, and wanted again. Most men don't say it directly. They'll say they're tired. They'll say that they've tried and nothing changes. They describe something that doesn't have a clean name. Not a crisis, not disaster, just the particular weight of a life that stopped feeling like theirs somewhere along the way. They're managing everything and inhabiting almost none of it. And somewhere underneath all of that, there's a question that they haven't said out loud, not to their wife, not to their friends, sometimes not even to themselves, because saying it feels like betrayal or an admission of something they're not ready to face. Is this actually over? Not, are we struggling? Not, are we going through something? The real version, the one that shows up at 2 a.m. when the house is quiet and you're lying next to someone you used to feel close to, aware mostly of the distance between you two. Is this it? Is this how it ends? Is this who we've become? If that question lives somewhere in you, even quietly, even as something you've pushed back down because you don't want to be the kind of man who thinks it, this episode is for you. Welcome to episode 55. You don't know if it's over. You just know you can't keep going like this. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this question. Not the loneliness of being alone, the loneliness of being surrounded by your life, the house, the kids, the routines, the responsibilities, and feeling like you're somehow on the outside of all of it. You're keeping everything running. You just stop feeling like any of it belongs to you in the way it once did. When the question finally forms, it feels dangerous because asking it, even privately, seems like a step towards something irreversible. Many of the men I work with are religious, and divorce is not something that they believe in, and they tell me that early. But something I've noticed consistently, the men who say divorce isn't an option are often the most stuck. Not because they're wrong about their values, but because when one door gets completely taken off the table, it becomes harder to see any of the other doors. What's left is a binary. Stay and keep suffering, leave and lose everything. When those feel like the only two choices, the question, is it over, becomes almost unbearable to sit with. There's no good answer inside a binary like that, so you don't ask it. You push it down. You stay busy, and you tell yourself it will get better, or that this is just what long marriages feel like, or you'll deal with it later when things calm down. Meanwhile, the question keeps returning, usually at night, usually when there's nothing left to distract you from it. And what I want to do in this episode is not answer that question for you. I can't. What I want to do is help you see how many doors are in the room that you've stopped looking at. The choice was never just stay and suffer or leave and lose. It never was. But when you've been in pain long enough, two options start to feel like the whole world. When a man finally lets himself ask, is this over? He usually thinks he's asking about the marriage. He's not entirely. Underneath the question about the marriage is a quieter, harder question about himself. Is something wrong with me? It takes a while to get there. In the beginning, most men focus outward. They catalog what's missing. They inventory what they've tried. They build a case, sometimes without realizing it, for why the problem lives out there, in the dynamic, in the distance, in her. But after enough rejection, enough silence, enough moments of reaching and not being met, the question turns inward. What if the problem is me? What if she sees something I can't see And that's why she's pulled back. What if I'm just not the kind of man who gets to have this? This is what men carry longest without naming. It doesn't announce itself as a question about worthiness. It arrives dressed as analysis, as a reasonable attempt to figure out what went wrong. But underneath that analysis is something more fundamental, a fear that disconnection is evidence of something broken inside of him. Something that can't be fixed. Something that means he isn't enough, not for her, and maybe not for anyone. I name this not to amplify it because it almost never gets spoken. And the things that don't get spoken tend to run the show underneath it all. They shape how a man hears every interaction with his wife. They make rejection feel like confirmation. They make distance feel like a verdict that's already been handed down. What I want you to hear clearly is this. The disconnection in your marriage is not evidence of what you're worth. It's evidence of a pattern that developed between two people over time, in specific circumstances that hasn't been interrupted yet. Patterns can be interrupted. Your worthiness is not actually what's being measured here, even though it feels that way from inside it. But you can't interrupt a pattern you can't see. And most men at this stage can't see it clearly because the question, is this over, has collapsed the field of vision down to 2 exits and left very little room for anything else. Something specific happens to men when a marriage has been painful for long enough. The thinking narrows. Not because you're incapable of nuance. The men who find their way to this kind of work are often sharper and more self-aware than they give themselves credit for. But pain does something to how we see. Chronic, low-grade pain especially. The kind that doesn't announce itself as crisis but just sits there year after year, quietly reshaping what feels possible. At some point, you stop being able to see options. You stop initiating certain conversations because you already know how they're going to land. You stop suggesting things because the last several times led nowhere. You stop imagining a different version of the relationship because imagining it and not having it hurts more than imagining it at all. Gradually, without realizing it, you end up in a tunnel. Exits at the far end. A long corridor behind you made of everything you've already tried that hasn't worked. This is where "is this over" lives. Inside that tunnel, where the light is dim and moving in either direction feels like it costs more than you have right now. What I've found working with men at exactly this point is that the tunnel isn't the truth about their situation. It's what happens when pain goes on long enough without the right kind of help. The options didn't disappear. They became invisible. One of the most useful things I do with a man in this place is something that sounds counterintuitive. I ask him to actually think through what leaving would look like. Not to do it necessarily, not to plan it even. To think through it honestly and to feel what comes up when he does. What would it look like? What would he lose? What would his daily life actually be? What would he tell his kids? What would he grieve? Not because he's supposed to, but because it would genuinely be gone. What surfaces in that exercise is rarely what men expect. The grief comes up, real grief, often for the first time. Not the managed version they've been carrying, but the actual disappointment, the anger at how things got here, the sorrow about the years that passed without the closeness they wanted. That's important. Those emotions have often been converted into numbness or resentment or relentless productivity, and they haven't had anywhere to go. This gives them somewhere to go. And alongside the grief, something else happens. The tunnel opens up. Not because leaving looks appealing. For most men I work with, it doesn't. The losses are real, and they can feel them viscerally when they actually sit with it. But the middle ground comes back into view. Things they haven't tried, conversations that haven't happened. A whole range of territory between stay and suffer and leave and lose everything that they stopped being able to see. When you can look at the exit clearly, you can also see everything that comes before it. And most of the time, what men find is that they're nowhere near out of options. They've been in pain and enduring it, but endurance was never going to be enough. Enduring and trying are not the same thing. I can't keep going like this. Let's just slow down on that phrase because it's not just frustration, it's information. I can't keep going like this. The word that matters most is like this. Not I can't keep going, not I want out, but like this. This particular dynamic, this specific version of the marriage, the way things currently are. Which means somewhere in you, you already sense a different version is possible. Otherwise, the sentence wouldn't contain that phrase. It would just be, I can't keep going. The fact that it's like this suggests some part of you still believes something else is available. You just can't see how to reach it. And the distance between where you are and where that other version lives feels right now like it might be too wide to cross. That distance is real. I won't pretend it isn't. There are real layers of hurt on both sides that have built up over a long time. Real history. Real moments that haven't been repaired. That doesn't close overnight because someone decided to try harder. What it isn't, though, is a verdict. It's a direction, and those are very different. Most men I work with, when they finally say, I can't keep going like this, are not at the end of their marriage. They're at the end of their current approach to it. They've exhausted what they know how to do. They've hit the limit of enduring without support, without new skills, without a genuinely different way of showing up. That's not the end. As uncomfortable as it is to hear, a reasonable place to begin. There's a version of this fear I hear often, and it deserves its own space. I can't see the next 20 years looking like this. Men say it quietly, sometimes with shame, as though wanting something different makes them ungrateful for what they have. Sometimes with a kind of exhaustion that goes bone deep, like just imagining 2 more decades of this is enough to take the air out of the room. I take this seriously, not as a prediction of what will happen, but as honest information about what the current path feels like from the inside. And then, almost always, the next thing a man says is some version of, I just want to go back to how it was. Back to when things were good between us. I understand that impulse completely. There was a time when it worked. When there was ease between you and closeness and something that felt like genuine partnership. Of course you want that back. But here's what I find myself saying gently and directly to every man who goes there. The road you took led here, and you don't like where here is. So going back to the beginning of the road doesn't actually help you. It just starts the journey again. The same turns, the same gradual drift, the same accumulation of distance leading back to this same painful place. Maybe a decade from now instead of now. What you actually want isn't to go back. What you want is to arrive somewhere different. And the only way to do that is to learn to navigate differently. New skills, a different way of reading the road, a different way of showing up at the moments that matter. Not because the old version of you was wrong, but because the old version of you was working with what you had, and what you had wasn't enough for this. This is where men sometimes push back and say, but I've tried, I've done things differently, I've read, I've gone to counseling, I've had the conversations. And I believe them. I also know that trying harder in the same direction isn't the same as developing new capacity. Reading about swimming and getting in the water are different experiences. Understanding intellectually that you need to show up differently is not the same as having the actual ability to do it when the moment comes and your nervous system is pulling you somewhere else entirely. The work ahead isn't just reflection. It's not insight sessions that feel meaningful in the room and then evaporate by Tuesday. It's the slower, less comfortable work of addressing old hurts and old stories that are still running in the background. The narratives you built about yourself, about her, about what love is supposed to look like, that were formed long before this marriage and have been quietly shaping it ever since. That work belongs to you. Not as a strategy to get her to change so things can finally be good for you. That framing, doing the work so she responds differently, puts you right back in the same trap. It makes your well-being conditional on her behavior, which means you're still not the one holding the wheel. This work is for you, because you deserve to know how to be in a relationship without losing yourself to resentment or distance or quiet despair. Because the next 20 years are going to happen regardless, and who you are inside of them is something you actually have influence over. There's also a fear worth naming directly, one that men carry about those next 20 years but rarely say out loud. Sometimes it's about their own integrity, a recognition that they're lonely enough, disconnected enough, and that they're becoming vulnerable to infidelity. Not because they want to blow up their entire life, but because the hunger for connection has been unmet for so long that it's starting to look for a door. That fear is worth listening to. It's not shameful, it's their values sounding an alarm. Sometimes the fear runs the other direction, a quiet wondering about her, whether the distance has a reason, whether she's already somewhere else emotionally, or whether the disconnection has made her vulnerable in the same way. Both fears are signals, not predictions. They are telling you that the status quo has a cost that's higher than it looks like from the outside, and that doing nothing is not actually neutral. You came into this episode carrying a question you may not have said out loud before today. I'm not going to resolve it for you, and I'd be cautious about drawing any conclusions from where you're currently standing, because right now, you're looking at a marriage from inside a tunnel with a field of vision that pain is narrowed considerably. Verdicts made from that vantage point tend not to hold once the light comes back. What I want to leave you with is this. Most men who are asking, "Is this over?" are not actually at the end. They're at the end of what they've tried, which is a very different place. And between where they are and the actual end of what's possible, there's a significant amount of territory. Hard territory, real work, no guarantees that they haven't entered yet. The path back isn't backwards. It's through something you haven't done yet. That might mean developing emotional skills you were never taught. It might mean sitting with the grief and anger and disappointment that have been converted into numbness for years and need somewhere to go. It might mean looking honestly at the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are, who she is, and what's possible between you, and being willing to find out which of those stories are true and which ones have just been running unchallenged for a long time. None of that is small, and none of it comes with a guarantee. But it comes before the answer to the question you are carrying, and you haven't gotten there yet. If you want help understanding what that territory actually looks like for you specifically, not in general terms, not as a framework, but for your marriage, your history, your particular version of this, that is what a relationship clarity call with me is for. We'll look at your specific situation honestly, what's happening, what's possible, and whether working together makes sense. Yes, I'm going to tell you about how I work, and I'll also make sure you leave with more clarity than you came in with. You can click the link below to book, or you can go to elisastoddard.com. And if this episode helped you name something you've been carrying quietly for a long time, that matters. It's usually where things begin to move. That's what I've got for you this week. Take care. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If something in this episode hit home, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more men find the support they need. And if you are ready to get help or take the next step, you'll find the link to book a free call in the show notes. I'll see you next time.